Microplastics in canned seafood. They're big and there's a lot of them. New research which examined the presence of microplastics in canned seafood has been published. The results are fascinating, at least for a food safety nerd like me. I unpacked them into easy-to-read chunks for you and even made a grid-based image to compare the sizes of the microplastics to a human hair. Here's what I found. Types of seafood in the survey: sardines, octopus, mussels, tuna and mackerel canned in sauce or oil. There were 6 products in total. Source of the samples: most of the products in the survey were manufactured in Portugal and all were purchased in Portugal. How many cans contained microplastics? Just under half of the cans, that's 45% of 60 samples, contained at least one particle of microplastic. All 6 products contained microplastics, and the sizes of those were in the range that is of 50 micrometers to 3,000 micrometers, with 40 particles recovered in total from 60 cans, and that is 10 cans of each of the 6 products. Where exactly were the microplastic particles? The particles were found in both seafood tissues and the immersion liquids in the cans, with 65% in seafood tissues and 35% in the liquids. When it came to tissues versus liquids, it was different from product to product, and there was no clear pattern across the product types. For example, in one product, that was chub mackerel in sunflower oil, none of the 10 cans had any microplastic particles in the sunflower oil, with all of the microplastics found in the mackerel, while the sunflower oil in another product, that was sardines in sunflower oil, contained all the microplastics in the cans and none in the fish tissue. Which products were the worst? Octopus in tomato sauce had the most microplastics in the animal tissue, and sardines in tomato sauce had the most microplastics in the immersion liquid. Note there were no statistically significant differences between the product types. What size, colour and shape were the microplastics? The microplastics were between 50 micron and 3,000 microns in size, with 45% being smaller than 500 microns and 18% larger than 1,000 microns. Oh, and just a quick side note here, when I say microns and micrometers, it's the same thing. The particles were shaped as fragments, fibers, and films. So 75% of them were fiber shaped, 18% were fragments, and 8% were films. They were of 8 different colours, with blue, transparent and black the most common colours. Where did the microplastics come from? The original source of the microplastics was not discussed by the researchers in this paper. However, the most common materials were polyester, polypropylene, polyethylene, rayon, nylon and polyvinyl. The most common type was of fibre, and the most common fibres were polyester. That is 40%. Most of the fibres were blue or transparent, 40% and 37% respectively. I'm thinking perhaps fishing nets. Other fibres were found, so they found rayon at 27%, nylon 20% and polyethylene 13%. And they could have originated from clothes or from disposable personal protective clothing worn by workers in the fish processing factories. Disposable personal protective clothing, or PPE, is usually made from polyethylene. Other studies have attributed fibre-shaped microplastics to the release of fibres from clothing during washing. Clothing fibres include rayon or nylon, and the fragmentation of fishing ropes, lines and nets. How did the microplastics get into the can of seafood? Pathways for microplastics to get into canned seafood include from the food animals themselves, if they've ingested the particles directly, or from ingesting prey such as plankton or other fish that contain microplastics, or by inhaling microplastics through their gills. Obviously not really inhaling, but you know what I mean. Secondary pathways are contamination during harvesting processes and seafood preparation, such as fish filleting and can filling processes, which are often done by hand or from other ingredients added to the cans. How big exactly were these pieces? The particles described by the researchers were of a size that's generally visible to the naked eye. Yes, this really surprised me. And naked eye, we can see objects in the range of 50 to 60 microns. For example, a human hair is 17 to 181 microns wide, and a sheet of paper is 70 to 180 micron wide. Thick, that would be. The most commonly identified particles in this study were between 50 microns and 500 microns in size. So, based on this study, how many microplastics would you eat in a year? Using the USA estimate for canned seafood consumption, the researchers estimate that, based on the prevalence in their samples, the average person might consume 226 pieces of microplastics from canned seafood per year. Are microplastics a hazard in food? There's little evidence that microplastics cause measurable negative health outcomes in people. Nanoplastics, however, appear much more likely to be harmful. Find sources for these statements, of course, plus broader discussions of the safety of microplastics and nanoplastics at the links that you will find in the email and the post. Takeaways for food professionals. Whether or not microplastics pose direct risk to consumers is poorly understood. However, it seems prudent to try and keep them out of any food your company manufactures. However, because they're considered almost ubiquitous in the environment, and because there are so many sources of environmental microplastics and so many pathways for microplastics to enter foods, developing effective controls will prove challenging. For highly manual tasks such as fish filleting and can filling, a risk assessment that considers fibre shedding from workers' PPE could be a good starting point. In short, a significant number of microplastic particles were found by researchers who examined canned seafood. Many of the particles were of a size that it's visible to the naked eye. Particles were found in both seafood meat and in the sauces or oils in the cans. Fibres were the most commonly found shape, polyester was the most commonly found material, and blue was the most common colour for the microplastics found in the cans. Clothing fibres, PPE fibres, and fishing equipment could be sources of microplastics in canned seafood. And you'll find the main source, which was Silva et al. 2024, in the email and in the post.